Here is a little video on how I would go about beginning and sort of continuing to start mapping out how I would draw something like this using the ideas that we've been talking about. First of all, I am going to scan with my pencil like I've been talking about, both right to left and up and down, and I'm going to identify this, that was the right point, but I usually start with the top because that's the beginning of my abbreviation that I enjoy and helps me remember. It's really not that critical, but building some kind of routine and is a way of helping you sort of come at everything without come at any new drawing with a little more confidence. So after that, I'm going to create. I'm going to sketch in this bounding box. It's interesting. I can very much tell that I have not warmed up drawing. So this could be a do as I say, not as I do moment. But I did want to get this out to you guys. So that's sort of a bounding box idea that goes through all these points. I'm going to identify sort of the main diagonal. I do like to try that in 3 steps usually. I may bust out a white charcoal pencil to try to help see a little bit better. I'm not sure if that'll work or not. Nope. Oh well. Hopefully you're getting the idea. So one of the other things I would do is try to identify some midpoints for this bounding box. And just start learning more about this particular grouping of things that I'm about to draw. I don't think that's exact, but I'm going to let it be like that. And at that point, I want to also continue to keep learning about this particular grouping, like I say. And I want to start continuing on with some scanning and imagining both level lines and plumb lines and determining where something significant occurs. I'm going to say that for that point, and I'm going to say that for that point, and I'm sketching these in so I can relate these to the bigger box, the bigger idea. I'm going to I'll do a similar sort of idea for this top stone and relating it to this box. I'm going to do a couple things here. I am going to try to identify the top point of this middle stone, which is a little bit different than the bottom point of the top stone. how about the top of the, this is always fun, the top of the bottom. The top of the bottom stone is a little bit behind this middle stone, so I'm gonna have to imagine all the way through there. And the can do the same with the same idea with the bottom of the middle stone is around there. And so after I've identified some of these, and there's certainly more, that point and that point would be an easy landmark. We're looking for both, significant events or something sort of occurs, and it helps to be able to pick points that are you'll be able to find easily over and over again. Excuse me. So at that point, I would continue to sort of just think about this whole shape. What this stone sort of takes up space-wise, what this middle one takes up space-wise. And what the top one takes up space-wise. And then at that point, when I'm trying to sort of relate those to this outer box, a couple different ways of doing it. Since I do have what I think of as this midpoint, might be smart to double check that. Sure enough, not that close. But I can find where these other plumb lines and level lines relate to the outer box by comparing them to these midpoints. And the other way I can do it is by comparing them with these angles, an angled line. So let me show you a little bit about going about doing that. So this overall bounding box, I'm going to try to copy this angle. Sketch it in. I'm going to start with that, that's okay. I could trace things like right across from each other, and that's certainly one way of doing it. But I do like to I'm usually not drawing things exactly the size that my source or references, so I do like to make sure that I understand how to do it both bigger and larger. So let me see, I'm going to get that thing out of my way. I started out with just the diagonal, but that's certainly one way to do it. But then I realized I wanted to do this a little bit bigger. So I will usually start with 3 sides when I'm trying to kind of copy some sort of rectangle with a diagonal. And then deciding where the last line goes based on sketching in diagonal. So I'm kind of looking over at the reference. I'm kind of looking at my drawing and sketching in. You can do this. In fact, I would encourage you to do this as lightly as possible. I'm doing it a little bit darker so it shows up well. So then when I get that, like we've talked about, I'm going to compare some triangles, because that seems like it's doing okay. But what will help me feel even more confident about it is if I imagine the triangles that diagonal creates with the bounding box, and thinking about that triangle and thinking about that triangle and seeing if they seem to be a decent match. And as I'm looking at it now, it seems like it's okay. I reserve the right to completely change my mind. I'm also just kind of doing an eyeballing, kind of imagining, does this rectangle really seem like it's the same sort of proportions as that? Yeah, it's a little bit, it's not quite square. This is not quite square. Let's leave it at that for now. Let's start with that. So then I will identify some midpoints here. Just real generally at first. So I can begin to both relate points like this, where the actually let's do the big stone. The big stone would be good to start with. So I can identify points like this, where the top of the stone lines up with by comparing it with these midpoints, which that looks pretty darn close to the midpoint. So I can imagine that that is sort of where the top stone goes. I mean, the top of the bottom. There's that phrase again. And I can double check it, or I could just use that originally. To think about the space that stone is taking up, that bottom stone is taking up. And just like I did in the main bounding box, after I've created that triangle, that diagonal, I'm going to think about, does the proportions of that really look like the proportions of this? Does that triangle seem to really kind of emulate that triangle? It's close. It seems like it's a little bit flatter. So I'm sort of etching away a little bit. So let's, from there, let's think about the middle stone. So the bottom of the middle stone is, I could once again sort of think about this line and think about how it relates to the midpoint. It is, all these are pretty close to each other. I could also imagine a diagonal going that way, or just creating any sort of triangle that helps me pinpoint that point. I'm going to just sort of sketch it in right there for now, a little bit lower. This point, the height of the middle stone, once again, I can either use, sort of compare with the midpoint and think about splitting that space up. Losing track a little bit, I think that was my midpoint. And that would it sort of be kind of up there. And I can also imagine a diagonal, an angled line coming from, really coming from any point that I already feel confident with, relatively confident. I think I'm going to do that. I'm kind of double checking. Seems like it's a little bit higher. Once again, I'm trying to find the height of the middle stone. And then similarly for the side of the middle stone, I can compare this with either the midpoint and sort of try to imagine that, or I can, or I should say, well, and I can think about the angle from this point that we are relatively confident of, although now I'm really wondering, yes, if you will have to try to keep all these things straight, and it can be a little bit confusing, obviously. But I do find when things start getting just too, this is, I am drawing this very dark, and the idea, once again, the idea is that you'll be doing this pretty light, so hopefully it won't be as confusing. But these are all going to help me find the points for the stones and where they sort of live in this space proportional to each other. And then translating that to this new space that I want them the same proportions to each other. So let's see, sort of stopped at that being that side. I can imagine that. Can imagine it that way too. And since I'm really bored with construction lines, I'm going to start drawing a freaking stone. Let's take this bottom shape. Kidding aside, I could certainly keep going and making more construction marks and measuring and finding points. But now I'm just ready to do some drawing. So I'm trying to draw this bottom stone. And a couple things. I want to think about the rectangular space that it's taking up. And do I sort of have that somewhat accurate? And it seems like I do. So I'm just kind of sketching in once again lightly, kind of a oval. I am kind of enjoying noticing, like I talked about, sort of our gestural envelope, even around, not just around the whole grouping, but about individual shapes as well. I'm going to start with that. The second one, it looks like it takes up kind of a space from, that's right, that one sort of went above. The second one is going to take up a space a little bit like something like that. This middle one is cool in that it really is much more of a, I don't want to think about the gestural thing, I can think much more about sort of a rectangle. And let's see, when I didn't really sketch in some points for the top one because I was getting sick of those and wanting to draw something. Cleaning up that one a little bit. And let's see, this top one, midpoint is there. Once again, I can. It helps to double check these points, or plumb lines and level lines, by imagining diagonals from points you've already determined. Let's see, I'm going to say that it ends about over there. If you're really confused right now, you're not the only one. No, I kind of have too many points going on here. So I'm going to accept that I'm confused and start cleaning some things up, removing things that are really confusing me. And remember where I started out from. This was my bounding box. That was the middle of it. That was where this stone sort of ended. So this one would be a little bit more ending there, and looks like about there. I'm just going to sketch in a real general oval. So that would be one way to get off to a start, by leveraging some of these tools and concepts and strategies that we know to help us really come at it from a place of having a decent idea of where some of these points are going to go, I'm adjusting just a little bit visually by eyeballing. I can tell that this middle one should be a little bit further over. But that is, like I said, one way to sort of to start all this stuff. I'm gonna continue on in another video. It does look very snowman-like. Here's me not continuing on. Starting to refine that. That needed some refining. Anyways, that would be one way to do it. And once again, sort of creating where these obvious events happen, using comparing things to a midpoint, and or comparing things with by creating diagonals and double checking the triangles that they imply. Okay.